Thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. A senior official in the Trump administration has just resigned. And the resignation is apparently in protest against this president. His name is Chuck Rosenberg. He's a lifelong law enforcement veteran and a former prosecutor. He was a U.S. attorney under President George W. Bush, both in southern Texas and in eastern Virginia. He was chief of staff to the FBI director and to a senior Justice Department official. And since 2015, he has been the acting director of the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. Well, today, he resigned, effective almost immediately. He will reportedly be out by the end of the week. Michael Schmidt of the New York Times was first to report the news by way of explaining Rosenberg's decision to quit. The Times described Chuck Rosenberg as having, quote, become convinced that President Trump has little respect for the law. Now, the Washington Post followed up with their own story confirming this news. Veteran Justice reporter Carol Leonnig summed up that reporting and her own reaction to it on Twitter by saying, quote, this is a big deal. Chuck Rosenberg, known as a smart manager and a devoted law enforcer, leaves. Said he concludes Trump does not respect the law. So this is an important story in its own right, and it would be in any administration, right? Top law enforcement official concluding that the president doesn't respect the rule of law, and then resigning on those grounds, letting it be known that that's why he is leaving, which is remarkable on its own terms under any president. But of course, under this president, and in this particular case, there's also a personal dimension. Because I mentioned that Chuck Rosenberg once worked as a chief of staff for an FBI director. That FBI director was James Comey. Chuck Rosenberg also served as James Comey's chief of staff when Comey was the deputy attorney general at the Justice Department. So that's another twist on this story. The DEA director who just submitted his resignation today in protest against President Trump not respecting the rule of law, that DEA director and the FBI director who President Trump fired, these two guys have a long history of working together, and they're said to be personally close. And this resignation of the DEA director came today within hours of the first reporting that the special counsel's office is about to start interviewing current and former White House officials about, among other things, the president firing James Comey. Now, we know from Washington Post and New York Times reporting last week that Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation has sought information from the Trump White House on a long, long list of actions by this administration related to the Russia investigation and related to potentially obstructing justice by trying to impede the Russia investigation. We know that the main lawyer in the White House handling the Russia investigation divided Robert Mueller's requests into 13 different categories. We think we know what those 13 categories of requests are now, based mostly on reporting from the Washington Post, but also the New York Times. And according to the reporting from those papers, the requests from the special counsel, the stuff they're asking the White House about, it ranges from anything related to Paul Manafort, which is the last one there, to any White House discussions about James Comey's firing, to any White House documents about Mike Flynn talking to the Russians during the presidential transition. It's a big, long list, 13 different categories of information about which the White House has reportedly fielded requests from the special counsel's office. But CNN reports tonight that Robert Mueller's investigators may be about to start interviewing current and former White House staff right away, as soon as this week. And the sheer breadth of topics and incidents that Robert Mueller is asking about ensures that there are a lot of Trump White House staffers who are about to get questioned by these prosecutors. And of course, even if you've done nothing wrong, you have to be very cognizant of the fact that it is a crime to lie to federal investigators. And anybody getting interviewed in this kind of a process could surely benefit from expert legal advice. Well, today, the Daily Beast was first to report that former White House spokesman Sean Spicer is the latest Trump administration official to have to hire a high-powered criminal defense attorney on the Russia issue. On that long list of requests for documents and information that the Mueller inquiry has reportedly given to the White House, 2 of the 13 items we believe Robert Mueller has asked the White House about, 2 of the 13 are specifically statements by Sean Spicer. Mueller is said to have asked about Sean Spicer's public statement about the firing of James Comey, a statement that he made the night Comey was fired. Mueller is also said to have asked about another public statement by Sean Spicer concerning James Comey that was issued by the White House about a week before Comey was fired. And then right after we learn that Sean Spicer's statements, those two public statements by him, are in the crosshairs of the special counsel when it comes to the firing of James Comey and whether or not that was obstruction of justice. Right after we learn that those two statements by Spicer were being focused on by Mueller, Axios was first to report that in addition to those statements he made as White House spokesman, in addition to his known public statements about all of these controversial things that happened during his months in the Trump administration, Sean Spicer was reportedly also widely known to keep copious, very detailed, longhand notes of everything that transpired throughout his time in the campaign and in the transition and even into the White House. He kept a detailed diary. Learning that, it seemed impossible. I mean, as of just a few days ago, it seemed impossible that Sean Spicer didn't yet have himself a criminal defense lawyer in the Russia investigation, given the fact that his statements as White House spokesman are under the microscope and he kept a diary. How does he not have a lawyer? Now he has a lawyer. As of today, Daily Beast is reporting that he has got himself a highfalutin lawyer. Now, as to how he will pay for that lawyer, stay tuned. So far, the Trump re-election campaign and the RNC appear to be paying hundreds of thousands of dollars of Russia-related legal bills only for President Trump and his eldest son, who is also named Donald Trump. They only pay for legal fees related to the Russia matter if your name is Donald Trump. Now, one might imagine if you were Sean Spicer or Mike Pence or Hope Hicks or Don McGahn or Reince Priebus or even Jared Kushner or any of the other Trump White House staffers who've had to hire their own high-powered criminal defense lawyers on the Russia matter, one might imagine that that might be kind of a sticking point, right? Possibly a point of resentment, that you're stuck paying what are likely to be millions of dollars for your own legal fees, while the billionaire president and his son and heir, Donald Trump Jr., get their legal bills covered by OPM, by which I do not mean the Office of Personnel Management, I mean other people's money. How does that sit with you? If you're looking at bankrupting your family to pay your legal fees for a scandal involving Donald Trump, while Donald Trump doesn't have to pay a thing. As I say, there's always a personal dimension to these things, too. And, as I say, stay tuned. We've actually got a little bit of news on that front and that seemingly unsustainable dynamic within Trump world coming up a little bit later on this hour. But here's another part of this that appeared to hit a breaking point in today's news. One of the other things we know that Special Counsel Robert Mueller has asked the White House for information about is the meeting that was held on board Air Force One while the president was flying home from the G20 summit. During that flight, the president himself reportedly drafted a statement that was put out in the name of his son, Don Jr. That statement tried to explain away a meeting that had happened at Trump Tower last summer between Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, the president's eldest son, and a whole bunch of Russians, all of whom turned out to have ties to the Putin government, and at least one of whom has ties to Russian military intelligence. And although Donald Trump Jr. soon released emails that made clear the purpose of that meeting was for the Trump campaign to receive damaging information about Hillary Clinton that they were told would be provided to them from the Russian government as part of the Russian government's support for Donald Trump in the election. Despite that explanation for that meeting being laid clear in the Don Jr. emails that led to the meeting, that initial explanation about the meeting put out by the White House, that initial statement that was drafted on Air Force One, said nothing about Hillary Clinton at all. That statement, reportedly written by the president personally, tried to explain away that Trump Tower meeting as having just been some stupid thing about Russian adoptions. We now know that that deeply misleading, lying statement is of interest to the Mueller investigation. And that is particularly salient and presumably particularly concerning for this White House because it involves the president personally. Part of the president's personal defense about that bizarre meeting in Trump Tower is that he says he didn't know about it at the time. Donald Trump Jr. has insisted publicly that he never told his dad about that meeting, despite the fact that his dad was there at Trump Tower that day while the meeting took place and while his son-in-law, his eldest son, and his campaign chairman all attended in person. When the news of the meeting first broke in July, the president publicly said on his own behalf that that was the first he'd learned that that meeting had happened. He told Reuters, quote, "No, that I didn't know until a couple of days ago when I first heard about this." That assertion from the president that he'd never heard anything about that Trump Tower meeting with all those Russians, that may also turn out to be a problem for the president because of the timeline of what happened around that meeting. June 3rd, 2016, that's when Don Jr. got that first email promising that the Russian government had incriminating information about Hillary Clinton, that this Russian lawyer from the Russian government wanted to hand over in person at this meeting at Trump Tower in order to help Trump win the election. That email was sent to Don Jr. on June 3rd last year. Took him less than 20 minutes to respond. "If it's what you say, I love it." Then over the following 4 days, Don Jr. now admits that he had 3 separate phone calls with one of the Russians who was supposedly supplying this information about Hillary Clinton. We know nothing about the content of those calls, but he says there were 3 of them. Then by 4 days into this, June 7th, the communication chain, as much as we know about it, came to a close. Because on June 7th, they confirmed that the meeting would happen. 6:14 p.m. Eastern Time on June 7th, Donald Trump Jr. sent an email confirming the details for that meeting. At that point, we know from the communication chain that Don Jr. believed in a couple of days he'd be meeting at Trump Tower with a Russian government attorney who was flying over from Moscow to meet him, to hand him incriminating information on Hillary Clinton from the Russian government that the Russian government believed would help the Trump campaign win. Confirmed. Yes. Hit send. I love it. Planning on that meeting. That was June 7th. 3 hours later, on June 7th, after he hit send, confirming that meeting, 3 hours later, that same night, Donald Trump Sr. won a whole bunch of Republican primaries, clinched the nomination, gave his victory speech, which turned out to be different than usual. Turned out to have one key diversion from his typical victory speech, stump speech script.
I am going to give a major speech on probably Monday of next week, and we're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very, very interesting. I wonder if the press will want to attend. Who knows?
So that was a Tuesday. That was Super Tuesday, June 7th. The meeting with the Russians had been confirmed 3 hours earlier. The meeting with all the Russians happened 2 days later on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then the following Monday, June 13th, when Trump was probably going to give that new speech detailing all this new information about the Clinton campaign, where the Clinton campaign, we now know, was braced for whatever this new Trump speech was going to be, where he'd promised all this new dirt on Hillary Clinton. Instead, that Monday, nothing. Trump just gave one of his normal speeches, nothing new in it at all. But then you know what? 2 days later, sensitive internal documents stolen from the Democratic National Committee started to leak online. First, it was Guccifer 2.0 and DC leaks. Then it was WikiLeaks. And of course, the person who did more than anybody else to promote and draw attention to those leaked documents was Donald Trump himself. But other people associated with his campaign did more than just hype those documents and promote them. At least one other person associated with his campaign appeared to be in communication with the Russian operatives and cutouts who were leaking these stolen documents from the DNC. At least one person associated with the Trump campaign actually bragged publicly that he had advanced knowledge of when those leaks were going to come out. And that's something that ends up being hard to explain away later on when you try to make the case that your campaign had nothing to do with this Russian attack and this Russian effort to influence the election, and anybody who says it is nuts. In August 2016, Paul Manafort's longtime business partner and a longtime political advisor to Donald Trump, a man named Roger Stone, he bragged publicly that he was in touch with Julian Assange at WikiLeaks. Then the Smoking Gun published screenshots of Roger Stone's direct messages with the Russian hacker or hackers who were going by the online handle Guccifer 2.0. In late August, well before anybody knew that it wasn't just the DNC, that Clinton campaign chair John Podesta had also been hacked, the Trump campaign's Roger Stone tweeted advance notice that actually John Podesta personally would be the next target. Nobody knew what he was talking about when he sent this tweet. Quote, "Trust me, it'll soon be Podesta's time in the barrel." But then sure enough, weeks later, on the day of the Access Hollywood tape, John Podesta's in the barrel. John Podesta's stolen emails start getting pumped back into the American political bloodstream in selective leaks from WikiLeaks. So that operative from the Trump campaign appeared today before the House Intelligence Committee. The top Democrat on that committee is Adam Schiff. He's going to be joining us live in just a moment. But there's one other part of this that appears to be breaking open at the same time. It is a related matter, and that story is next.